The report listed notorious names from Latin America, many of them trained here at the School of Americas in the state of Georgia, where American officers used manuals like this to teach the black arts of terror and repression. Most Americans are completely unaware of this.
You know, you looked at the Truth Commission report in El Salvador, who was responsible for the massacres. Very high percentage of them were trained in at the School of the Americas in Georgia. And down, not just in El Salvador, in Panama, in Honduras, in Guatemala. You go, as I have, you go and meet with the high command of the military in Central America, and you see on their walls diplomas from the School of Americas and other U.S. institutions. So when people talk about terrorism, it's always over there. It's not the terrorists that the United States have supported.
We have done more throughout our history, and since World War II in particular, I think, to create conditions in which individuals can be free around the world than any other country in history.
In Afghanistan, Colonel Rod Davis is helping to spread that message of individual freedom.
Good morning, I'm Colonel Rod Davis. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for CJTF 180. That's the coalition military force stationed here in Afghanistan, specifically at Bagram Air Base. This morning, what we're going to do is take you on a tour of Bagram Air Base, and we're going to tour numerous facilities. The airfield itself will point out...
This is Bagram Air Base near Kabul. It's here that Al-Qaeda suspects are interrogated and disappear, and where there have been allegations of torture. Many of them end up in Camp X-Ray at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. What happens, Colonel, to innocent people who are swept up in this? People who have come through your detention facility here at Bagram, but there really isn't a case to be made against them, and they've kind of disappeared.
Well, let's talk about what you refer to as the detention facility. We'll hold right there,
How
allow
would
you to get some images.
How would you describe it if it's not a detention facility?
Tell you what, we'll talk about that. Let's pull off to the side here and let you take a few images.
Oh, this is it over here, is it?
Well, we'll let you know.
Okay.
What I can assure you and your public of is this. That anyone that's under custody, any of the holding locations, they're attended to medically. Medical care is provided. They're fed. They're looked after. There's no abuse or torture that goes on inside of any of these holding facilities.
Well, there have been allegations of torture, haven't there? Particularly, there's a military pathologist who actually described the death in custody of a man here. I think his name was Delaware, who she described it as homicide, murder. You know that case?
I'm aware of the allegation. And what I'll say to you is I think anyone who's fair would have to say that Americans in particular, but certainly members of the coalition, aren't known for committing atrocities. That's not something that's part of our history. It's not the way we do business. It's not the way we treat people.
If you were arrested in the United States by a foreign army and brought to a holding facility, wouldn't you expect to have certain basic rights? That is, access to lawyers, access to people outside, not just simply to literally disappear?
Well, you talked about status before, and as I said, it's rather complicated. And I guess there's some type of continuum or spectrum, if you will. You know, probably prisoners of war off to the far left or right, depending on your perspective, and something less than that to the far other end. We're somewhere on that spectrum.
Yeah. Somewhere on that spectrum is this man. Wazir Muhammad is a Kabul taxi driver who disappeared into Bagram in April last year. He's now in Guantanamo Bay. He's not been charged with anything. His crime was to inquire after a friend another taxi driver, who was arrested and who has since been released. What makes this case so appalling is that this man is recognized by the present government as having resisted the Taliban. This is his brother Taj Muhammad, a nurse. This is where he is now, Guantanamo Bay, where prisoners are shackled, trussed, and kept in cages 8 feet by 7 feet for up to 24 hours a day. The light is always on. Children and old men have been incarcerated. Amnesty International calls it a black hole, a violation of the most basic human rights. There are 9 British citizens here, including this man, Shafiq Rasool from the West Midlands, who was effectively kidnapped by the Americans 2 weeks after he'd arrived in Pakistan, where he has relatives. That was almost 2 years ago. Since then, his family has pleaded for help from the British government, but still, he's been charged with nothing. These are the oil fields of the Middle East, the greatest prize of all. Iraq is the world's second biggest oil producer, and its conquest gives America a vast base from which to dominate the Middle East. It's been a conquest achieved at any price, including truth.
It was serious dishonesty, the result of which includes the fact that thousands of Iraqis have died. Hundreds of soldiers from our own countries have tragically died.
Andrew Wilkie is the only serving Western intelligence officer to break cover and expose what he believes to be the truth about the invasion of Iraq. Working in the top-secret Office of National Assessments in Canberra, he saw intelligence shared by America, Britain and Australia.
We were sold this war on the basis of Iraq possessing a massive arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, which was never found and won't be found because there was no massive arsenal of weapons. We were also promised a need for a war on the basis of active cooperation between Iraq and Al-Qaeda, and the fact that it was just a matter of time before some of these weapons from this massive arsenal were passed to this terrorist group. Always a ridiculous proposition, and always completely at odds with my experience in the intelligence community that there was no hard intelligence to establish that there was a link between Iraq and Al-Qaeda.
You know, I never saw any evidence that would link it, and thus far there's been no evidence produced that would suggest that Saddam was behind Al-Qaeda. In fact, my experience in the time I served would suggest the opposite, that Saddam was the least likely person to want anything to do with Al-Qaeda. The only reason